Can you lend me money for my brother's hospital bill?
What? Are you kidding me?
In the middle of the night, the doorbell rang loudly, and Nolan showed up at our house, soaked from the heavy rain. After hearing the situation, John raised his voice and hurled insults at him. Unforgivable. How could anyone treat my precious grandson like this? With John grabbing a baseball bat from his room, we headed off to confront a certain someone. My name is Lily Anderson, and I'm 65 years old. I'm a housewife who enjoys cafe hopping. My husband, John, is the owner of a construction company. Originally, we planned for our son, Scott, to take over the business, but during high school, he had such bad behavior that he was nowhere near fit to run the company. He'd skip school, cut classes, and he was constantly getting picked up by the police for wandering around at night. Fed up with Scott's reckless attitude, John gave him a stern warning to find a job on his own. Scott, who was in the middle of his rebellious phase, felt his pride was hurt and stormed out of the house. He didn't come back for quite a while.
Dad, I have a child now. I have a wife, too. I came back today because I wanted to show you my kid.
But then, one day, several years later, Scott suddenly came back home. Standing next to him was a woman I didn't recognize, with a nervous expression, looking reserved and hesitant. At first, I didn't understand why she was so nervous, but I quickly realized the reason. In Scott's arms, a cute baby was crying. That baby was our first grandchild, Nolan. At the time, Scott was working as an office worker, and he met his wife at his job. He explained later that he had wanted to come back home many times, but couldn't find the right moment, and things ended up like this. Even though we had tried to contact him multiple times, he didn't respond because he felt it was his way of taking responsibility.
I told Dad I didn't need his help when I left, so I thought I couldn't face him unless I had a proper job and was living a decent life.
Scott muttered awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. His wife, standing beside him with her head hanging down, seemed to be feeling uneasy.
I'm sorry things turned out this way.
Scott followed suit and apologized for the late news. Seeing the two of them, John scratched the back of his head in distress and let out a deep sigh.
It's been 6 years. Ha.
Huh?
It's been 6 years since you left. You've been doing your best on your own all this time. And you, miss, thank you for staying by this knucklehead's side. Having a grandchild is a wonderful thing, isn't it? So why don't you stop with the long faces? Lily, can you order something tasty for delivery? It's a special occasion after all. Let's relax and enjoy.
I think John's face, as he said this with a smile, was the gentlest I'd ever seen. Seeing this, Scott and his wife, too, seemed relieved, and for the first time in a long while, our home was filled with laughter. After that, Scott started visiting us more often. Nolan grew up strong and healthy, and I thought these peaceful days would last forever. It was around that time. Suddenly, Scott's wife left a divorce paper behind and disappeared, leaving Nolan and Scott. When John pressed Scott about what had happened, we found out that Scott had accumulated a huge debt.
A friend invited me to invest in stocks. I don't make much money, so I talked to him about the future, and he suggested stocks.
Scott got lucky the first time and made a big profit, but then he got cocky and borrowed money to buy more stocks. But the stocks he bought took a nosedive. He ended up with a $20,000 debt.
What were you thinking, borrowing money for such a risky gamble? Don't you have any sense of responsibility as a parent? You have something you need to protect.
I had no choice. With an annual income of around $30,000, I needed money to support my family. I was struggling in my own way.
As soon as I heard them arguing, Nolan, who had been playing with his toys, started crying. I quickly tried to comfort him, and hearing Nolan's cries seemed to snap John out of it, too. Once he calmed down, he convinced Scott to contact his wife first. John ended up taking on Scott's debt.
If this happens again, I won't let it slide. You need to realize that you have something to protect. Got it?
Scott couldn't help but hang his head as John harshly scolded him more than ever before. After that, Scott tried contacting his wife multiple times, but he never managed to reach her. Years later, we found out that she had built a new life with another man. This led to Scott and her getting a divorce. Scott ended up taking custody of Nolan. Since then, Scott and Nolan have been living with us. Fortunately, since Nolan was too young to remember his mother leaving, he didn't have many memories of her as he grew up. So, he never seemed to miss her, and he grew up strong and healthy, leaning on me, John, and Scott.
Grandma, look. I got accepted into high school.
Before we knew it, Nolan was already in his third year of middle school. Unlike his father, Nolan was dependable and takes things seriously, putting in great effort in both sports and academics. John also recognized Nolan's hard work, and he was accepted into one of the top sports high schools in the state. To attend that school, Scott and Nolan had to leave our home.
It's too far for him to commute from here, and I know someone over there. I can't keep relying on my parents forever, so I'm going with Nolan.
If you do anything to worry Nolan, I won't let it slide. You better remember that.
Tisk, I know.
Even though Nolan was doing his best, the tension between Scott and John remained. John couldn't forgive Scott for his past mistakes, and Scott harbored resentment towards John, making no effort to mend their relationship. In the end, they left with a deep rift still between them. For months after they left, I couldn't stop worrying about them. But then, one day, Nolan called to tell us that Scott had a new girlfriend and that she was a really good person.
She takes good care of the house, and I got a little brother now. I think Dad might get remarried. I'd feel relieved if this woman became my mom. And more than anything, my little brother is so cute.
Even though he must have been busy with his sports activities, Nolan made sure to video call me and John almost every day. Apparently, the someone Scott mentioned before was his current girlfriend, and Nolan said he was confused when he found out the truth.
Yeah, being told out of the blue that you have a little brother is pretty confusing.
Scott's girlfriend had lost her previous husband to illness and was raising her young son alone. Scott couldn't just leave her to handle everything by herself, so they started living together when Nolan entered high school. Nolan didn't have any issues with it since there wasn't really any downside for him. If Nolan's doing well, that's all that matters, but remember, if anything comes up, you can always count on us, okay? What's most important to Grandma is you, Nolan.
Thanks, Grandma.
I didn't notice it at the time, but Nolan's smile seemed pained when he said that. Not long after, something happened. That evening, a severe rainstorm hit. A hurricane was approaching, and the trains were shut down. The rain was expected to continue into the next day, so the nearby schools announced closures. John's company also decided to prioritize safety and gave everyone the day off.
This rain is awful. The site for the day after tomorrow might be dangerous too, with the ground being so muddy.
Since the end of the year is coming up, I wanted to do some cleaning. I also need to go shopping. Oh, is it okay if we have pasta for lunch this weekend? Even though we finally had some time to relax together, the heavy rain left us with nothing to do. With nothing else to do, John and I spent the time in the living room, watching our usual programs on TV. Before we knew it, we both dozed off, and when we woke up, it was the middle of the night. The doorbell rang.
Ha! Who could it be at this hour?
Seems like someone's here, but in the middle of the night. Groggy, I looked at the clock, which showed 1 a.m.
Who in the world would ring the doorbell at this time?
John frowned, his expression darkening, as he headed toward the front door in annoyance.
Yes. Who is it at this? Nolan!
What? The moment John opened the door, his loud voice echoed through the house. Hearing Nolan's name, I hurried to the front door, too. There, I saw Nolan, drenched from head to toe, standing in the doorway with his little brother in a raincoat.
Grandpa. Grandma, please, help my brother, save him.
As soon as he said those words, Nolan collapsed from exhaustion and relief, and John quickly carried him inside. I grabbed the baby strapped to Nolan's back and hurriedly removed his wet clothes, warming his body with a dry towel. The baby seemed to have a fever and was breathing a bit heavily. Sensing something serious, I immediately contacted a pediatrician friend, who rushed over to our house. Meanwhile, John was taking care of Nolan in the living room, drying him off and putting him in some fresh clothes. Luckily, Nolan was just worn out from fatigue and relief. He had no injuries or other health issues.
It's just a cold. Babies usually have higher body temperatures than adults, so there's no need to worry as long as he rests today.
Hearing the pediatrician's words, both John and I let out a sigh of relief. After seeing the doctor off at the door, I went back to check on Nolan, who had just woken up and was sitting up. You're awake. What happened?
Grandma, how's my brother? Where is he?
As soon as he regained consciousness, Nolan was more concerned about his brother than himself. To reassure him, I gave him a gentle smile. Don't worry, we warmed him up right away, and he's fine now.
But he's got a fever. We need to take him to the hospital right away. Where's Grandpa?
Right at that moment, John entered the living room, and Nolan immediately knelt down and started pleading.
Grandpa, please. My brother's really sick. Dad and his girlfriend are out drinking, and I can't reach them. You're the only ones I can turn to. Please lend me money for my brother's hospital bill. I promise I'll pay you back with my next paycheck.
Paycheck? What's that supposed to mean?
John frowned at Nolan's cryptic words. And when we heard the full story, we were in for a shock.
Ever since we left your place, I was attending the high school I got into at first. But one day, Dad suddenly changed.
It turns out that Scott had met his girlfriend at a bar, and influenced by her love for gambling, he quit his job. Now, he was making a living through gambling, playing things like slot machines and poker, and was rarely home.
At first, she was okay, but once Dad got hooked on gambling, she dumped all the responsibility for my brother and the house on me, even expecting me to cover the household expenses.
Nolan tried to talk to the school about the situation, but Scott prevented him from doing so. Scott started going to her bar, and even got involved with some shady people. Since then, Nolan was controlled by force, living according to Scott and his girlfriend's demands.
I couldn't manage both taking care of my brother and doing sports, so I dropped out of high school. I begged Dad to let me at least get my high school diploma, so now I'm working multiple part-time jobs while attending an online high school.
In the little time he had left, he took care of his brother and the household chores. He was essentially a young caregiver. Hearing this, I trembled with anger, clenching my fists tightly. John, who was listening next to me, hung his head in silence. I was already furious with my son, but for his girlfriend to be like this too. Unforgivable. Seeing our reaction, Nolan, worried, quickly spoke up and started pleading again.
I don't care what happens to me. But my brother is just a baby. I can keep going because he smiles at me. If I lose him, So please. I promise I'll pay you back, just lend me the money for his hospital bill.
What? Are you kidding me?
John's voice boomed louder than I'd ever heard before.
You shouldn't have to do something like that. Don't say something so foolish.
Nolan, not expecting to be yelled at, flinched, and John, with a fierce expression, grabbed a bat from his room and headed out the door. Wait, where are you going?
Isn't it obvious? I'm going to knock some sense into those fools. They put my precious grandson through this. That idiot still hasn't learned his lesson after everything he's done. I was too soft on him. I'll beat some sense into him and wake him up.
John's face was red with anger, and his eyes were bloodshot. Nolan, who didn't want this to happen, hurriedly joined me in trying to stop him. But as John struggled to shake us off, we suddenly heard a baby crying from the back room.
If we don't hurry, it'll be too late for him.
Nolan, remembering the urgency, tried to bring the conversation back to the hospital, but I quickly explained the situation to him. Learning that his brother was okay, Nolan collapsed on the spot, tears of relief streaming down his face.
I was so scared that something might happen to him. I'm really glad. I'm so glad he's okay.
Nolan began to cry out loud, his love for his brother clear as day. Thanks to Nolan's emotions and the baby's cries, John calmed down, and we all returned to the living room. So, what do we do now? Honestly, I don't think we can trust Scott with Nolan anymore.
I agree. I won't stand by and do nothing.
Even though John had calmed down, there was no way we could leave things as they were after learning the truth. Nolan also opened up, asking for help if possible.
I'm more worried about my brother when he gets older. I don't care what happens to Dad and his girlfriend, but I'll do anything to keep my brother safe.
Lily, get in touch with him.
Huh?
That idiot is using shady people to threaten Nolan. An eye for an eye, and we'll use some shady methods of our own.
As soon as I heard those words, I understood what he meant and immediately made a call. Nolan, not understanding what was about to happen, watched nervously. Not long after, we managed to track down Scott's current location. Accompanied by some people, we headed to that place and walked into a bar.
Welcome. Oh, John, I've been waiting for you.
As soon as we entered, a woman who seemed to be named Miranda, working behind the counter, brightened up at the sight of John and quickly came over to greet us.
It's been a while, hasn't it, Miranda? How have you been?
John, you're the one who hasn't shown your face in so long. I was wondering what you were up to. And Lily, it's been ages. How have you been?
I've been well, Miranda. It was rare for Miranda to step out from behind the counter to greet customers, so all the staff and customers quickly turned their attention to us.
What's going on? Is there a celebrity in here?
There's no way a celebrity would come to a place like this in the middle of nowhere. Oh my gosh, Scott. Scott.
Hearing the commotion, I spotted Scott in the back, slouched over in a booth, clearly drunk, with his girlfriend clinging to him affectionately. As I glared in their direction, his girlfriend noticed my stare, and her face went pale. She quickly nudged Scott, who was too out of it to realize what was happening.
Miranda, I'm sorry to trouble you, but could you take care of the matter we discussed on the phone?
Of course, John. Anything for you. All right, everyone, let's do this.
With Scott and his girlfriend in a panic, Miranda gave the signal to the staff and customers who had been briefed beforehand. The customers nodded, and one of them discreetly pointed their phone camera in our direction from a seat out of Scott's view.
Dad, and Mom too. What are you doing here?
What do you mean? What are we doing here? Do you even realize what you're doing?
Yikes.
Scott, finally noticing us at his girlfriend's urging, froze as he saw our faces, his drunken haze dissipating in an instant. His face turned pale. As he realized we had shown up unexpectedly, and the shock left them visibly shaken. As John yelled at them with a furious expression, Scott let out a pitiful cry. Next to him, his girlfriend, Rachel, looked terrified, trembling as she stared at us.
Does this look like the behavior of someone working a respectable job? What did you tell me when you left? Wasn't it that you wouldn't be a burden to Nolan?
So that brat ratted me out to you too.
John's words must have triggered something in Scott's mind, and he realized that Nolan had come to us for help. Glancing around, he spotted Nolan holding his brother near the entrance. Scott stood up, grabbing an empty bottle, his eyes filled with rage.
Nolan, you snitched on me to Dad and Mom.
As Scott hurled the empty bottle toward Nolan, a man suddenly grabbed Scott's arm, snatching the bottle away. The man then twisted Scott's arm behind his back, preventing him from struggling. Caught off guard and restrained, Scott began to thrash around in panic.
What the hell are you doing, old geezer? Let me go.
Oh, you've got a pretty big mouth for a kid who's been getting help from our guys, don't you?
Huh?
As the man continued to restrain Scott, he spoke with an air of confidence. Scott, baffled by the man's words, looked at him in confusion, only to see a group of rough-looking men, clearly thugs, storm into the bar from the entrance.
Hey, you guys. What are you doing here? Did you come to save me?
These were the thugs Scott had been associating with, and he must have thought they had come to rescue him. Scott's eyes lit up for a moment, but the men burst into laughter, mocking him. One of the men, clearly the leader, walked up to Scott, lightly slapping his face as he revealed a shocking truth.
What are you talking about, you idiot? It's the opposite. We've heard you've been causing a lot of trouble for the Great John's grandson.
The Great John. The moment Scott and Rachel heard those words, they turned to look at John in shock.
I got a call from Miranda. I was surprised when I heard what you'd been up to. You've been using our names to threaten your own son, huh?
How do you plan on making up for using someone else's name to do dirty work, huh?
Scott, now surrounded by several men, was released from the old man's grip, but there was no way for him to escape. The rough-looking men encircled Scott and Rachel, making sure they couldn't get away. While the other customers and staff were all buzzing with excitement.
Is this really John's son? He seems a lot more spineless than you were at his age.
Don't rub it in. I'm just as disappointed to have raised such a pathetic son.
You know, Lily would have been better off marrying me. It's tough enough dealing with this idiot. And now she's stuck with this fool of a son too. If you ever change your mind about who you want to be with, just let me know. I'm always ready to welcome you.
The old man, David, laughed heartily. As David and John exchanged words, Scott, completely bewildered by the situation, started to panic and muttered in confusion.
What? What the hell is going on here? Who is this old man? And why do these guys know you too? Who the hell are you?
Scott, overwhelmed, bombarded them with questions. David, with a smirk, finally revealed his identity.
I'm the father figure to these guys you've been hanging around with.
In other words, he's our boss.
What?
The shocking revelation left Scott wide-eyed in disbelief. Rachel, too, was stunned, her mouth hanging open in surprise, while Nolan watched the scene unfold in amazement.
Back in the day, this guy and I were best friends, bonded through countless fights. We've been through thick and thin together. I was stronger, though, so he always ended up crying after I beat him.
Crying? You were the one who always lost and whined about it.
What? John and David leaned in, forehead to forehead, bickering as they had done in their younger days. The men around them couldn't help but smile at the sight, and Miranda took the opportunity to share more details.
Back in the day, these two were the golden duo running things around here. There wasn't a delinquent in the county who didn't know their names. No one could beat them in a fight, and they had a lot of people who looked up to them. They were pretty cool, you know. John protected the town publicly, while this guy, David, handled things behind the scenes.
Don't be fooled. John was just one step away from ending up in my world. We're not that different, really.
Don't sulk just because you didn't get much of an education.
As the banter continued, Miranda walked over to me, linking her arm with mine, and revealed yet another shocking truth.
And Lily here was the Madonna of these two. She was famous all over town for her beauty and brains. It's nostalgic to remember how they used to fight over her with their fists.
Oh, come on, Miranda. Stop. You're embarrassing me.
Even we looked up to you, Lily.
Everyone in our world knows about these three.
Scott, still in shock from the revelations, couldn't close his gaping mouth, and Rachel was just as dumbfounded.
But the most surprising thing is that Lily was the strongest of them all.
What?
Hearing this, both Scott and Rachel looked completely stunned. Neither of them could beat me in a fight.
No way.
Lily, don't say that.
Couldn't beat you in a fight?
Hearing those ominous words, Scott nervously spoke up. Seeing this, Miranda, realizing he truly knew nothing, began to explain the situation with an exasperated tone.
Lily's family is renowned in the boxing world. Her father won the national high school championship and even competed as a professional. Lily herself has been practicing boxing since she was a child, and she's won numerous tournaments.
The color drained from Scott and Rachel's faces as if they had heard a sound effect. Their eyes shifted toward me, now seeing me in a different light. When I heard from Nolan about how you were using some shady people to threaten him, I reached out to Miranda for help. John's a regular at Miranda's place, so she was more than happy to assist. As I explained why they were in this situation, Miranda flashed a mischievous grin while giving a thumbs up. I've turned a blind eye to your misdeeds up until now, but not this time. Don't think you'll get away with it like before. As a parent, you've done something unforgivable to Nolan and his brother. I cracked my knuckles for emphasis, adding pressure to Scott. The figs surrounding him also glared at him menacingly, while the onlookers, both customers and staff, looked at him with disdain. It's time you paid the price.
And you'll be paying for using our names to scare your own kid, too.
Coming here to mess around when you haven't even paid back your debts. You've got some nerve.
As one of the thugs grabbed Scott by the collar and growled, Scott started to sob, tears streaming down his face. Seeing this, Rachel panicked and tried to distance herself from the situation, insisting she wasn't involved. She desperately tried to save herself.
I have nothing to do with this. He's the one who got into debt on his own. I was just here for work. We were only having a drink because my shift ended. I haven't done anything to bother you, Lily, right?
It was clear she was hoping to be spared, pleading for mercy. Her words made me sick to my stomach. Furious, I couldn't hold back, and knelled at her with a voice so deep and commanding that it startled everyone around us. Don't give me that crap. Enough with the excuses. You, as a parent, as a mother, have done something completely unforgivable. The moment those words left my mouth, Rachel's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch, trembling with fear. She kept muttering apologies, but there was no way I was going to forgive her. I stepped closer, looming over her, my eyes cold and piercing. You not only neglected your own child, but also stole precious time from Nolan, dumping all the responsibility on him. Your child had a high fever. What do you think would have happened if you'd left them alone at home? It could have been something you couldn't have undone. Do you even understand the responsibility you bear as a parent for abandoning your child?
But...
And you, too, Scott.
Huh?
Rachel was speechless, biting her lip in frustration, unable to argue against the harsh truth. Then I turned my anger on Scott, who had let his guard down. As a parent, you dumped child care duties on your own child while you indulged in your own pleasures. Don't you feel any shame? What you did is something that will never be forgiven. You stole Nolan's precious teenage years, and you won't get away with it. You'll pay for the time Nolan lost. Both of you are about to face a living hell. As soon as I said that, the Figs restrained Scott and Rachel, dragging them out of the bar.
What are you doing?
Let go of me. Don't touch me.
Damn it, Nolan.
Scott and Rachel struggled desperately to break free. But there was no way they could overpower the strong men holding them. As they were dragged closer to the entrance where Nolan was standing, Scott started pleading with him for forgiveness.
Nolan, please help me. I was wrong. From now on, I'll take care of you and the baby. I won't make you suffer anymore. So please, I'm begging you. Help me.
Yes, Nolan, please. We were wrong. We'll change, I promise. Please help us. If this keeps up, I won't be able to see the baby again.
The moment Nolan heard those words, he flinched and told the Figs to wait. Respecting Nolan's wishes, I signaled the Figs to stop. Nolan, who had been avoiding eye contact, slowly lifted his head.
You said you didn't want to lose the chance to see the baby and begged me to help you, right?
Yes, that's right. From now on, I'll take care of both you and our son. So please, help us.
Then why didn't you help me when I asked for it?
What?
Nolan's voice cut through Rachel's desperate pleas, his eyes now filled with anger and resentment as he looked at her.
When I was sick with a fever and couldn't take care of him, I asked you for help, didn't I? What did you say then? You told me, it's your fault for not taking care of yourself, and then you went to the casino with Dad, didn't you?
That's...
Rachel stammered, unable to find the words to respond. Nolan continued, his voice cold and sharp.
And Dad, when I begged you to let me keep playing baseball because I didn't want to quit, what did you do? You put your foot on my head and laughed, didn't you? You said, with your skills, you'll never be a regular. Give up and start working. Forget high school, get a job instead, and crushed my dreams, didn't you?
No, that's not it. We were really struggling financially.
Then why?
Nolan shouted, cutting off their pathetic excuses, while holding his brother close, covering his ears so he wouldn't hear the anger in Nolan's voice. Tears of frustration streamed down Nolan's face as he glared at them with a mix of sorrow and rage.
You never once worked yourself to the bone for us. Why did you always take the easy way out? When Mom left, when you got into debt, you didn't even try to change. It's because you never had any intention of changing, isn't it? Why should I believe a word you say now? And you too.
Nolan's anger, suppressed for so long, erupted as he turned to Rachel.
You say you don't want to lose your precious son? After ignoring him all this time, what kind of nonsense are you spouting? When was the last time you changed his diaper? When did you comfort him when he cried at night, bathe him, or cook for him? When? I had to beg my boss to let me take him to work with me, and I've been taking care of him around the clock so you could do whatever you wanted. Don't ever say you want to see your son again. You're not even parents, you're just worthless trash. Don't ever show your faces to me or my brother again.
The harsh words from the usually gentle Nolan left them both stunned. A moment ago, they had been struggling violently, but now, in shock, they fell silent and stopped resisting. Seeing their reaction, Nolan seemed to come back to himself, lowering his head as he struggled to hold back tears. I quickly stepped in, shielding Nolan from their view, making sure they couldn't see his face. Then, to drive the final nail in the coffin, I delivered one last blow on Nolan's behalf. Everything happening right now is the result of all the wrongs you've done. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. You'll never be able to come near us again. Regret it in the deepest pits of hell. At my signal, the Figs took them away to their hideout, and we never saw them again. This is how we succeeded in protecting Nolan. Since then, Scott and Rachel have been living through a hell on earth under David's control. They've been thrown into such grueling labor conditions that menial tasks doesn't even begin to describe it, and every penny they earn is sent to Nolan and his brother. I've heard they cry and beg for forgiveness every day, but there's no way David would ever allow such whining in his presence. They even tried to escape, but were caught almost immediately, and now they are forced to work themselves to the bone in the harshest conditions underground. When Nolan heard about their situation, he showed no intention of forgiving them, and even said he wouldn't mind if they were put in an even worse environment. Apparently, David found that very amusing. Since then, Nolan and his brother have been living with us. There was an attempt by his girlfriend's family to take the baby back, but Nolan pleaded desperately.
Because of him, I was able to endure everything Dad put me through. Even though we're not blood related, I've raised him as my real brother. Please, let us live together.
To support Nolan's plea, I showed his girlfriend's parents the footage from that day, which a customer had recorded. Seeing the video, they finally understood.
Thank you for being so protective of our grandson.
They placed their trust in Nolan and us, on the condition that they could see their grandson a few times a month. Nolan now lives happily with his brother at our place. I wanted Nolan to continue playing the baseball he loved, so I negotiated with a local amateur team, and now he's back to playing baseball. He successfully earned his high school diploma and is currently balancing baseball and work at the same company. His younger brother has also started going to daycare and is growing up healthy and strong.
When I start earning my own money, Grandpa, you can retire and relax.
Don't be ridiculous. You're not off the hook yet. I'll take you to a great steak restaurant so you can still lean on me for a while.
Seeing John laughing like that, I couldn't help but smile too.